Welcome back to the Service Management Leadership Podcast. We have a great guest, Rory Canavan, frequent guest on this show. I don't know, it's 3, 4, 5 times. Rory, how goes it?
It's good, Jeffy. I'm just waiting for the sort of present in the post for all the times I've been on here by now. I know. We need to have some kind of like gold member podcast guest versus the bronze for those first timers or something. Some sort of VIP t-shirt or something. Yeah, that would do it.
When we hit it big, we'll make sure that you have all of the kits using British terminology of our stuff that you can ever dream of.
Oh, well, swag has made it over here, so I would know what you mean if you'd use that. So yeah.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Swag. To be honest, Roy, I think I'm a little old to use the word swag, but that's a different story. That's a different story. When I have teenagers, they remind me of, hey, you're too old to say that. All right. So today we have a great show for everyone. From the 2021 Global IT Asset Management Study by Deloitte, we want to give them full credit up front. I have gleaned 10 facts and figures that I want to get the expert opinion on. Does that seem reasonable? All right.
Okay.
Let's rock and roll. So, and these are taken directly from the Deloitte study. I'm not adding any editorial until we keep going. So nearly 90% of the respondents, who are mainly executives, believe that the rapidly changing business, regulatory, and technology environment is making it more challenging to embrace IT asset management maturity in their organizations. 90%. Seems reasonable, doesn't it?
Okay, well, I would say probably 88% of those may not actually be in IT.
Right.
So they would have shall we say, an outside view of the world around ITAM and SAM. It could be that they have a vague idea that, we've got a tool in place, or we got audited recently and we didn't come out the audit quite as badly as we thought we would. And maybe that is their sort of service level appreciation of where SAM and ITAM actually starts and stops. So that sort of figure wouldn't surprise me, but to that point we have to get past this sort of tortured assault course of thinking that SAM is an ELP generation machine.
Right.
We've got to, if you want to see material results on the IT estate, you've got to get agile. You've got to sort of pick your battles and win them and get better data in support of the ELP. So yeah, there's plenty of scope for low-hanging fruit in SAM and ITAM that would elevate that maturity along the curve.
Especially when we think of rapidly changing business environment, A, regulatory rapidly changing environment, B, and rapidly changing technology environment, C. Those three seem like, if you're an executive, IT or otherwise, you're afraid if you don't know what assets you have, include hardware and software, the money spent, and software represents what percentage, Rory, of an IT budget? It's like 10 to 20%, right?
It's got to be a sizable chunk, I would say. Yeah, and it depends how you subdivide it, whether you actually include the support and maintenance as part of the software.
Right.
But I'd say you've got to be even pushing 30% potentially. I guess it depends on the state and nature of the business that you work for. And I appreciate that changing mindset as we go to the cloud. You're not paying technically for software anymore, you're paying for services. And there is that transition. What are you doing with your existing licenses that are still fit for purpose and can be brought to the cloud? How do we get value from that? That's another challenge out there. Right. And then for the business and for SAM as a whole, if we go down that sort of FinOps route, how are we subdividing that service charge back to the business? Because if you do want to maintain those sort of value streams and total cost of ownership, you want to charge the IT expenditure back to the area of the business that's making the most use out of the service. So good luck. It isn't easy, but it's one of those paths that you're going to have to charge. Otherwise, everything is going to be centrally funded. And then IT has to square off against the business to say, you've got to pay for this.
Right. And let's be honest, if you don't know what you have, you don't know what you're paying for, and there's a disconnect between what you're paying for and the value or outcomes you're desiring, you even getting those fulfilled, right?
Well, totally, yeah. It's, you know, your e-portal, for example, in a retail environment is the IT service that is going to give you money. Your, I don't know, your ERP system where the toys are made, potentially that's the one that's going to be costing you money,
right?
But you may not necessarily have made that causal link between sort of base expenditure and then profits at the e-portal system as well. So it's a myriad of calculations and comparisons and contrasts that you have to make sense of what value the IT delivers to an organization.
Oh yeah, and so let's follow it up with number two, stat number two. A vast majority, 84% of respondents believe that they lack a truly effective ITAM initiative in place in their organization. That's pretty surprising that 84 are willing to say, 84%, hey, we don't do this well internally.
Okay. Well, again, and that I would argue depends on where they are on the maturity curve. If they're constantly reacting to audits, if they haven't got a base SAM suite in place which will give them the ERPs, then that's going to be a problem. But equally, then understanding that the contributing data towards that ERP is probably in other systems, is probably governed by other people. You can't just put it on the shoulders of one or two people who look after a SAM suite and expect a revolution. I was thinking about this before we started the presentation. Service management has grabbed that mantle of presenting itself as the acceptable face of IT to the business, and it's had a head start on SAM. So that idea that yes, we've got it all sorted here, we've got very few incidents, we've got very few problems, life is good, and then the licensing, I don't know about that. You know, that's SAM and ITAM, isn't it? And that's where the money is.
Oh yeah,
that's where the money is. So that idea that you know, maybe there has to be a closer link between the two. We have to sort of track those SAM values and SAM goals to IT service goals and to business goals. And I think once that union takes place, that shift in perspective that SAM needs to do and also service management needs to make, there might be more of an effort, might be more of a cohesion through the company to actually make serial change to run lean IT estates.
So here's what I see playing out. You tell me on this topic. Of that 84%, I'm going to guess 83.5% have gone through a recent software audit. They get hit with a big number, or they have to sign the check for a big renewal. And they're like, we need to stand up this function. We need to stand up this function. And then something else takes precedence, and then it just goes on down the way. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's about right. And it keeps sinking down and down and down until the next audit.
Yes.
And then it goes up and up and up again. And then they realize that the time to make the change to the data that contributes to the ELP was 6 months ago, not 30 days prior to the generation of the ELP. And yeah, it is that sort of zigzag sort of approach. You just hope gradually there is some ascent. Yes. And some of it sticks from each time. So the second, the third, the fourth audit, we are definitely putting something that's permanent in place.
That, renewals, or just understanding the security in your estate. People don't realize that SAM is one of the biggest advocates or biggest ways of helping to secure the IT estate, because your SAM tool will understand your patches. It'll understand what version, like, hey, we have 2003 server, we need to do something. That all comes out of your SAM tool and like how you're using those licenses, right?
Totally. Well, I mean, if you are designing that information security management system, you understand where the data should reside in your organization. Invariably, that's on some sort of electronic means, on some sort of software that accesses it. And typically that access comes from dedicated user licenses. So being able to track the licenses means you can track the access.
Right.
And also then, tying in HR data as well to make sure that licenses don't sit with ex-employees. Basic groundwork, fundamental grabbing of data, which Sam is very, very good at, should be being fed not just into those ERPs, but out into the organization, into adjacent IT disciplines too.
Yep, I'm with you. Risk, all that stuff. Plus, we have to think about the idea of technical debt. I'm a big proponent of addressing the technical debt. And I think Sam, of that 90% we talked about earlier, it helps you understand your technical debt, where some, just to make sure we're aligning the dollars or pounds or euros with what we should be doing, software, hardware, whatever. It ensures that alignment.
Yeah. And again, I'm just thinking of the war stories that we mentioned just before we kicked off here.
Yeah.
If there is a business or an IT need to, live with software beyond N-2 or 3 or 4, fine, but let everybody know about it. We have a piece of legislation here in the UK where it's whether companies deal with chemicals or substances hazardous to health, the COSH regulations. Now, in theory over here, you're supposed to keep employee data for the life of employment plus 2 years. And thereafter, it's bare bones facts. It's when you joined, what role you filled, date you left, that kind of thing, in respect of data privacy. But if you work in a COSH environment, you're supposed to keep the entire employment history for an individual for life.
Oh.
Because if they have a problem with a particular chemical that is, hazardous to health, and 20 years later they claim that, oh, it's the asbestos, gov, you need to pay me a lot of money, you need to be able to have a record to go back and say, actually, he never touched asbestos, he's got no claim to make. But that data will typically reside on a database, and unless you've got some sort of proactive path of managing that data through versions and iterations of databases, then maybe it does pay attention just to sort of leave it on a server in a corner with a sticker on saying, do not touch HR records for COSH purposes, whatever means or methods you have, so that you can live with that technical debt. But that, I would say, is an exception, not the rule. Just right. Because you can't be bothered upgrading is not a reason to leave everything on Office 98, as an example.
Right, or have 53 BI tools. That's an embellishment. But to have all these, a lot of organizations don't realize how many they have until they look at their SAM estate.
Yeah, and it's easy enough to do. I was in one truly enterprise organization, and the number of Linux OSs that were bouncing around was amazing. And totally unnecessary.
Yeah.
Because it means if you need to support it, you're potentially paying X number of organizations for that third level technical support, unless you've got a cast of thousands doing support in-house, knowing all those little tips and tricks.
Right. So let's move on to stat number 3. Another indicator of lack of organizational progress in ITAM is that, here's a couple of ones in here. 6 out of 10, 61% of respondents are yet to make IT asset management a self-funding program. Nearly half, 45% of all respondents, are those who yet to acknowledge that they're also unlikely to achieve the objective in 2 years. So 61% says it's not a self-funding program. It means we just address it when it comes up. And 45%, which is most of that 61%, says, it's not going to happen in 2 years. So we've gone from, we know it needs to happen, to, it's not going to happen.
Well, we just, again, go back to that thing of being agile, moving away from waterfall SAM.
Yes.
It's, like I said, this tortured assault course that we work towards an ELP. If you want to make your SAM or ITAM program self-funding, you start with recycling from day one.
Yes.
And I was thinking about this the other day with on another call I was on. It's producing this ELP is rather like baking a cake. if you know the eggs or the milk are off, you don't carry on in the hope that the cake is going to turn out okay. You get better ingredients and then you make the cake. The ERP is exactly the same. If you know your IT estate is not in tip-top condition, get it better. So in that recycling or reharvesting activity, you put a SAM or ITAM wrapper around it, and it self-funds the program. Right. And it happens year on year on year.
Even renewals or defending audits should pay for itself for self-funding, right?
If certainly the first time round, yeah. I mean, this is the thing, we all spin to this zenith of sort of dynamic SAM. But I guarantee there'll be purchases that will be made 4 or 5 years down the line from the original SAM program, whereby there's still low-hanging fruit.
Right.
I would argue you're always going to have low-hanging fruit, because the SAM or ITAM function does not have authority over the IT estate to say what can and can't be put on there.
But if we control or if we just said earlier that software contracts make up a huge percentage of the budget, and we're saying that these audits, most audits are US money between 100,000 and $1 million, some over $1 million. You can pay for a lot of headcount with those dollars or euros or pounds, right?
Absolutely. Do you mind if I do a bit of flag waving on a particular book that I've recently started reading?
No, you do so.
Is that okay? So it's in fact, hold on there, folks.
He backs his chair out. He gets up. I'm doing a play-by-play. He goes. He walks over, pulls a book off the bookshelf. What is it, Rory?
Okay, and here we go. It is Cloud FinOps. I hope that doesn't come back on as backwards on your screen.
No, it's good. Cloud FinOps.
Okay, so this goes back to it just reinforces the point that you actually made, that if you make these changes in the cloud whereby your architects can move as quickly around changing architecture in the same language that the procurement spend the money on the software itself, if you can get that commonality of language and you can get that flexibility of movement, the idea that you sort of spot the low-hanging fruit, so the developers all of a sudden are switching off the instances they flash up because they're no longer needed. They were just, oh, I thought I'd flash that up on the fly. One organization, I think there's an example in that particular book, they saved themselves $300,000. That's real money. That's money you can go back to the organization and say, do you know what, we wouldn't mind taking on a couple of guys because we've got the workload to justify it and we've just saved a load of money.
Yep. So in one organization I was in, I did this function for 4 to 6 months. I saved them $675,000 by just tying up, here's what license they are charging us for, how many are we using? This is how many, on renewals. This is what the contract says that we get. Are we using these? I mean, just that I don't want to even say manual comparison. That audit is a big harvest for most organizations. Getting into, I'm going to make your point for you. Number 4 on this study, more than half of the respondents, 54%, believe that cost efficiencies can be achieved by reducing overheads from IT asset inventory management, which is a lot of it's hardware, software deployments, issue tracking, and patch management. They feel like, hey, we're not doing this, but we could gain efficiencies just by doing the basic blocking and tackling.
Yeah. And I'm going to nerd out on this as well. So I'm part of a subgroup within Working Group 21. That looks after the ISO standards for ITAM, and it's around the principle of tagging. So resource tags, hardware tags, software tags. Oh, yeah. And the right now, the original standard came out, -2 came out with a view to putting it in front of the software vendors to say, help us guys, help us recognize the software that you produce and create the tags. And it was a bit of a damp squib. It didn't really take at all. There was I think Adobe do something around it. Microsoft used to. I don't know that they do so much anymore. And everybody else just went, nah. What's the value in it for us? Right. But somebody on the call, and I wish I could remember who actually said it because I would have given them a name check, but I can't. they said, what we need is some sort of impetus to go back to the software vendors and say, if you don't provide tags for the software, we want a 10% discount because it's harder to manage the software through the life cycle. And I thought, that's brilliant. God, I wish I'd thought of that. It's absolutely fantastic. But like you say, it's those basic sort of ideas around recognition of software, of understanding where it's installed, of acknowledging it, of just making it easier to manage, makes it easier to work with. And I wish that message would get through to the software vendors. If they made a little bit of an effort, it would go an awful long way.
Right. So I have this quote that I hope is applicable. The bad crooks don't understand the laws. The great crooks, they understand the laws and how to navigate them. And I feel the way, like with Sam, the people who understand the rules the best know how to navigate, know that, oh, you can't put that database on that cloud because it costs you way too much because Oracle doesn't like their database on Azure or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Just understanding those basic rules, those foundational rules is a huge step forward, even though it seems so minor.
Well, totally. And this is where the architects, should be doing some bedtime reading as well, I think, because they will know the ins and outs of the capability of the software, what it can and can't do. I think a little bit of further reading on their part, if they understood what you can and can't do with the software architecturally,
right,
then they would they'd be really onto a winner. They, because they could self-heal, they could self-serve then at that point potentially. Again, I was on an engagement in the US some years ago, and a schema had been designed whereby the live failover for a SQL database was another instance of SQL, and it was, okay, does the use case support that? If it does, we'll pay the extra money for that fresh license. So it is a hot standby.
Right.
But if it's a cold standby, well, why don't we just sort of get the software assurance on that, and that will cover the failover then.
Seems reasonable, right?
So yeah, but that was just, I think when the conversations had the architects, they're like, huh, what? Really? We can do that? So yeah.
How about putting all your backups in the cloud, making them easy? I mean, that's a different story. All right, moving on to number 5, the ability to cover all phases of the IT asset lifecycle. I want to pause right there and give kudos to Rory and Kylie and their team for appreciating, understanding, documenting all the phases of the IT SAM and HAM hardware, software lifecycle, but also having the appropriate processes that go with those lifecycle phases, right? Like software asset management isn't just one process. Hardware the same. They're not just one process. They're multiple. So let me finish this question. I'll tee it up. I want to give you all kudos because each one of those phases of the IT asset lifecycle has sub-processes. So the ability to cover all phases of the IT asset lifecycle indicated that there's another significant consideration. Currently, ITAM teams have been focused primarily on procurement, deployment, and appropriate usage of the assets, as well as ongoing discovery and license compliance. However, repositioning the transformational journey, because every organization's on transformation, the highest proportion of respondents, 72%, believe that managing issues related to IT asset decommissioning, which is both hardware and software, is the top area that needs improvement. And that's followed closely by the processes related to IT asset forecasting, pre-acquisition analysis, so on and so forth. A lot of that to say, everybody's been focused on procurement, deployment, and usage, and discovery and license, but they're coming around to, hey, we need to worry about how we decom, how we need to worry about how let's forecast usage, all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Your take on that. Sorry for the long-windedness there, Rory.
Not at all, not at all. So I think the focus that comes out of procurement deployment is driven by service management SLAs, because nobody wants to get in the way of, I've just requested a particular software title. Oh, well, that'll be with you in 3 weeks. I'm sorry, that's not good enough. I've got a job to do and I need the software to do the job. So getting fleet of foot around purchasing and deploying software means that service management has honored its SLAs and will worry about the licensing afterwards. And I think that is in large part the root of the problems that software asset management has to face. To your point about the life cycle and getting the decom and the disposal sorted, yes, we have a process for that. We've got processes for, well, we've 44 of them currently templated. But there is that stuff in the middle as well that needs management. And just to doff our caps in the direction of ISO, the point you made about sort of capacity management, sort of forward projections of expenditure and all of that kind of thing, that is going to come out of high level quality data once you are well down the SAM maturity curve. It is not a sort of a tick box exercise where we go request, procurement, deployment, disposal. Oh, high level analytics, ta-da, we've arrived. No, there is a massive step in between all of that. We've just talked about the birth of software. We've talked about the death. There's the whole stuff in the middle that needs management, and same goes for hardware as well. So understanding that journey that applies to your organization is absolutely vital, because that's going to give you the best train of data to come up with those statistics then that support.
The stuff in the middle is the license management, the renewals, are we using everything, try to avoid the technical debt, all of that analysis in the middle is all right. So I think the coming on and the decommissioning are risk-based. I think the stuff in the middle is monetary based, because that is where you find the big rewards, even though the other is important and it's risk-based.
Yeah. But just to track back to the ISO side of life as well.
Yes.
The way to get to those analytics, if you will, is to put KPIs against your processes, your SAM and HAM processes. So at that point, you've got performance levers against the life cycle, each and every stage of the life cycle. So the point at which, and again, it's my favorite example, the software request process, the quantity of software drilled down or that is used to honor requests from the license pool in a given 30-day session.
Right.
You might set a marker of 10K a month. It's arbitrary, whatever it is. Somebody will say, well, where is it this month? And you can start to do trend analysis month on month, and you can start to see spikes and troughs, etc. But then somebody's going to come to you and say, what about Microsoft? And then they're going to say, what about 365? What about SQL Server? So being able to dissect that data is going to give you the life cycle, not only of a vendor through an organization, but also the applications through the life cycle as well. And that's where that is going to be high in SAM. That once you get to that level, the ELPs just happen as a matter of course. They just sort of fall out of the back end of SAM then at that point. Are you getting?
No, but it's okay.
Sounds? Sorry, I don't know what it is. Can you hear it?
Oh, I can hear it. It stopped. There we go. No,
Well, it's right. You know what it is? I've unplugged my phone. My phone was plugged into the laptop. So sorry about that.
I will edit some of this out. So back on track. Back on track here. The part in the middle is where the money is saved, the money is made, and we can project. Because to your point, finding out who's using and who's not using Microsoft Project and reharvesting those is a big deal. Big deal. You know what I mean? Like, or our usage is going up, but let's go, I mean, our requests are going up. Let's go see who's using it, right?
Yeah, and whilst Microsoft Project as a piece of software cost-wise is not to be sniffed at,
Right.
there are more expensive pieces of software out there that are assigned on a user by user basis as well. So and that's the on-prem stuff, potentially the on-site stuff in the cloud is equally, if not more so, applicable, because that is cash you're burning if you're not using it,
and it's easily adjustable month to month or quarter to quarter. All right, you know what I'm saying? You can pull those out and your usage goes down and your bill gets less. So this study says the beginning and the end of the IT asset lifecycle appears to present the most difficult challenges to respondents. I believe it, because people know how, once it's in, they may not, especially hardware, they know how to manage it, but getting it in a methodical way and getting it out in a methodical way, that's the hard thing.
I think particularly too, if I don't wish to beat up service management, but I think
this is called the Service Management Leadership Podcast, but no offense taken.
But there is, it's not just, I think, a procedural challenge, it is also a cultural challenge as well. So that idea that you could have the best service management processes in place for requisition, purchasing, procurement, etc., that don't sort of give regards to licenses and stuff, that's fine too. But if it still takes 3 to 4 weeks to get software, as in that particular example I gave at the top of the recording, no wonder budget holders are off down to Currys or PC World, which is the UK equivalent of Best Buy to you guys, and making local purchases for software, which I absolutely had. Particularly ironic is that it was an educational establishment, and they had something like a 90% discount on Microsoft software. So they paid, I think at the time it was something like 30 quid for Visio Professional. At the time it was. These guys were happy to pop down to the retail store and pay £300 or £400, right, to get the software there and then. So speed was everything.
And that's where the service management world, this is my belief, has had a disconnect from their stakeholders, and it's growing. Because the first thing every service management org should do is go talk to those people that consume their services, right? And say, how can we make it easier? Because Amazon does that. When you go order something, they're like, how can we make this as easy as possible? You may pay, Amazon's gone from being a low cost marketplace to in the middle, but you have lots of choice. But, we need to, because consumers are hit on all sides with people trying to make it easy. You want to go to the grocery store, they're trying to make it easy. Order it on your phone, they'll bring it out to you. We in service management have to do the same thing. That's my belief. We have to make it easy to consume our services, easy to request, easy to make changes, easy to understand the IT estate for the CMDB. We have to do that much. It can't be an IT-centric thought process and world anymore.
Yeah. And I think if you go through an exercise in tracking the data, we did a really interesting approach when I was at college on the course I was on. We talked about entity relationship management, and that entity could be a request, it could be a contract, it could be a software deployment, but each of those entities has a life cycle,
right?
And the point at which stakeholders engage with that life cycle is where you try and make it as easy as possible.
Everybody else is making it easy to consume their services. We in the IT world need to do the same. So moving on to question number 8.
Okay.
The most commonly used ITAM tools that respondents to the survey reported using. First one surprised me at first, but more I thought about it didn't. Microsoft MCCM, 48% of people use it. ServiceNow, 23% use it. Number 3, in-house developed bespoke ITAM solutions, 17%. I read that to mean Excel. Because, there's not like these custom ITAM solutions that a manufacturing company is going to come up with. Anyway, number 4 is Snow software at 16%, Flexera is 5th at 15%. Any of that surprised you? I guess the SCCM being twice any of the others kind of surprised me.
I think, and again, when I started out in SAM, I would say to people who'd come on the courses that I'd run, who has a SAM tool in place, and they'd go, yeah, we've got SCCM. My definition of a SAM tool is one that can compare installation data to entitlement data.
Yes.
That is the default tick in the box. There is no doubt that if you are part of a larger organization, having a system like SCCM that can gather inventory data means it forms part of a wider solution, and that is fine too. So I think possibly the manner in which the question was asked may have sort of skewed the result there. And to your point about the sort of in-house developed apps reading AKA Excel, I think had somebody actually sort of said, and you can pick Excel, that number would have pushed it up to the top, as much because the requirement to bespoke report to match those needs means that Excel is great for sort of generating bars and charts and graphs and stuff and just ripping data out of SAM suites that, shall we say, have base level data output. Exporting that to Excel and then doing those nice sort of fluffy bar charts and pie charts and stuff is means we won't be getting rid of Excel anytime soon.
No. So let me reconstruct that question differently to you.
Okay.
Did it surprise you that only 54% of those organizations have a SAM tool like ServiceNow, Snow, or Flexera?
No, it doesn't surprise me at all, from the point of view that I did a survey 2 years ago myself, and it came out at, I think, around 48% of organizations didn't have any SAM tool in place. So that would play quite well to, which is quite depressing actually, because that data was taken in 2018. We're now 3 and a bit, nearly 4 years down the line. Doesn't seem that much has changed.
Nope. And that's why I think if I go back to the first one, that 90%, nearly 90%, believe that all these rapidly changing environments make it more challenging for ITAM and SAM. And then we followed up with more than half think that it's an important thing to invest in, but we're not going to invest in it. So of course that, only 54% having a tool, I guess it kind of makes sense. Not that I agree. I mean, I think that ITAM and SAM are the two of the only maybe 3 or 4 areas that you actually get hard dollar savings, hard euros, pounds. Like this isn't soft money. This isn't like, oh, you can save 3 man hours by doing it this way. No, This is, you get to save one person's FTE salary this month by doing X. I mean, that's big savings. Yeah,
I agree. So I guess it's just having that imagination to think, can we do this, rather than should we do this?
Right.
And I think if you're at that point where, and maybe it's one of those cultural things too, where you've been in the organization for 15, 20 years, and you've always operated that way, and you've not seen beyond the corporate shutters, as it were, to say, okay, well, company X or company Y over the road, they operate in a completely different way. They've got a more agile approach. They've thrown their arms around SAM and ITAM, and FinOps too, and they're making those changes on the fly. And they're trimming their sales accordingly and making good savings as they're doing so.
Yeah, and so this next one, number 9, it kind of dovetails into what you were saying. In general, there's a high level of correlation between the biggest organizational pain points and the engagement of external advisors, consultants, managed service providers. Basically, wherever I have a pain point, I elicit external help. says organizations where the biggest pain point is around the lack of consistent business processes related to IT asset management, getting to what you were saying, or around ITAM organization or talent, they seek external assistance in roughly 2/3 the cases, which is kind of funny because we know it's a problem. We're not going to invest in it. Oh yeah, now let's hire external help with it. You know, I mean, like, to me, the logic doesn't play out very well.
Well, long may it continue, because they should be coming to my door then at that point, and I'll gladly help them out for a small fee. Not a problem. Not a problem. My favorite use case and anecdote, if you don't mind me saying so, Jeffrey, was an engagement I had not too far away from where I live, circa a 5,000 seat organization. They had Snow software installed. I don't mind telling you that. Were complaining that they weren't getting the facts and figures out of it that they wanted, and were giving very serious thought to ripping Snow out altogether and replacing it with another product. We managed to go in, and for a 45-day engagement, we gave them an ITAM policy, an operations plan, 15 custom processes, 15 walkthroughs, sort of 15 process RACI chart, and an ecosystem showing how all the processes fitted together. I went back about 15 months after the engagement just to see how they were getting on, and I spoke to the lady in question who hired me, and I said, I'm always very conscious that I just end up, you know, giving people a ring binder on a dusty shelf, and it's, you know, nothing happens. So I asked her, I said, were the processes of any use? And she said, God, yes, she said. Armed with the process flows and the RACI charts, we were able to demonstrate what service management were not doing. Her words, not mine. Okay. And she said, off the back of that, as well as having procurement, she also got given software request, software release. She got promoted, was given configuration, and is about to get promoted again. So, and that's 15 months of doing the job right.
Has she hired you since to fix any other issues? That's the burning question for me.
No, she paid the coffee for the coffee though, so, you know.
Oh, yeah. That's, you know, depends if it's I was going to take a shot at a famous coffee chain, but I won't. For their $25 latte, that's, you know, average. But yeah,
but just to round off on that as well, just in case anybody think I was having a pop at Snow, I wasn't. They kept Snow software.
Right.
They kept Snow software. So once they realized what they should be doing around the tool was fit for purpose again.
So on that, I those that are connected with me know I love LinkedIn polls, because it's one of the few objective pieces of data points that we have. Mm-hmm. And I did a poll a few months ago, and it was like 70% of people have, or either are considering or recently considered changing ITSM or ITAM tools. And then I followed it up. That's a big number, right? I followed that up with why. And most of it was the way it was implemented, you know, and then you follow that up. And it gets back to my previous conversation in the service management world, where I think we failed. I made that my own problem too, where, you know, before you put in a tool, let's say, how are you going to use the data? What do you need out of it? Let's start prioritizing backwards from the consumer back to us, instead of now these tools are put in. Well, you get put in your organization, just like it did my last organization, you know, and every organization is so unique that I don't think if I was an organization where people were trying to implement a tool, I would not stand for it. I would be like, we have to reverse our vision on this.
Yeah. And if you think about it as well, if in a standard installation or configuration of a SAM tool, the first output eventually is going to be an ELP, right? Think about it too. At what point does an ELP actually get used? It's either an audit or it's a contract renewal. Right. That's it. And that is not enough of a business engagement to say to the higher ups, oh yeah, our ELPs now look bright and shiny. So what? You know, how does that help me? When you start to sort of get into the weeds operationally about improving the data that contributes to the ELP, that's when Sam and ITAM makes a whole heap of difference. And that's when you can start to talk about pounds, shillings, and pence, or cents and dollars, to help organizations and make the money go further and offer as well competitive advantage.
Right, competitive advantage is big. And when you mention ELP, you mean enterprise license position or something like that, right?
Yeah, effective license position.
Effective license position, which is basically, you referred to it. Let's take our entitlements, what we paid to use, against what we're using. Let's do that reconciliation. I know that's an accounting term, but let's match those up, see which ones we're up on, which ones we're down on. Now let's go forward looking and say, okay, what's our projected usage going forward, and make sure we calibrate. Did I sum that up acceptably?
Yeah, that's what would take place typically around a contract renewal then at that point. So you will see what you have installed, what you have in reserve, and then any additional or new titles that you may want to add to an existing contract. And indeed, there may be some that you want to take off as well, because I guarantee when the vendor comes in and says, we've got product X and we've got product Y and we've got massive discounts on them, and you really want to buy them now, and you think that's a great figure, but do we want to buy them now? Are we going to use them? And that should be the sort of gatekeeper questions that you should be being asked, rather than just looking at the figures.
So you mentioned DLP, and that gets me my last question.
Okay.
Around 2/3, really fact that I'll weave into a question. Around 2/3 of respondents, 64%, go through 1 or 2 audits, software audits every year, while 26%, it's a big number, face more than 2 software audits a year. 26% more than 2, that's a big number. The remaining 10% reported not facing any software audit. 65% reported that they need to make financial settlements every year, of which 51% believe that the monetary amounts involved have a moderate impact, and a further 18% think that the significant impact of the monetary settlements they have to make. So let's recap.
Yeah.
26% more than 2 audits a year. And half of those say that the financial settlement is moderate, with 18% being, hey, this is significant.
Yeah.
Those are pretty striking numbers, right?
Yeah, and equally, you're taking money out of the future pot of the organization. So that plan for a whizzy new product or a whizzy new business line, or I don't know, donations to charity, be whatever it may be, however your company is particularly driven, they go by the wayside. That has to offset the existing settlement, and the joy of, I use in inverted commas, of actually dealing with vendors and audits is that once you're around a table, the scope of actually negotiating refinements is based on the interpretation of the contracts. Who do you think has looked at that contract longer? I'm going with the software vendor lawyers.
Yes.
Okay. So if that's your only frame of reference, your only scope of negotiation, you better make sure that the data that sort of went in way back when, that contributed to the ELP, is owned by you, is fully understood by you, can be interpreted by you within the confines of that contract, because that's when you can push back and say, no, that's not right. Our data supports this point of view. And having that absolutely drum tight is vital, So
Microsoft probably does more contracts in a minute than you do Microsoft contracts in a 5-year span as an organization. And so I just picked Microsoft. You could choose Oracle or whomever. And so the ability to have somebody in your corner to help on those, I think, is also significant. But given that you mentioned innovation and all the ways you could spend, even just spending it on people, to invest in your people in areas that need personnel investment, because what we see is this around in the US, we have a term like a gerbil on a wheel. I don't know if it's in Europe, but what happens is you borrow from next year with these settlements. So now you're ill-equipped for the next one that comes around, because you haven't invested, you don't have the money to invest in that area. And so you're always this gerbil on the wheel, never able to catch up. The other thing that I can say for sure that nobody in the software area ever wants to hear, drum, 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 beat, is that once you get audited and you are seen or outed as not having your stuff together, once you're at that point, they're going to circle you like sharks. The word will get out and you'll have every software vendor knocking on your door very soon. Do you agree or disagree?
Totally. And not only those direct audits, but those, shall we say, audits handled by third parties, like one of the big four, for example.
Right.
So that if software vendor A turns to one of the big four and says, go audit that company over there, be very careful that 6 months down the line that they're not there representing software vendor B.
That's true.
Because they know the last audit was that god awful. The idea that, oh, we can get repeat business here if we approach software vendor B, and then we've got a ready pool of willing victims. Because if you're bad for Microsoft, there's a fair chance you'll be bad for Oracle, for IBM, for VMware, for SAP. The smell of badness, if you will pervade through your entire IT estate. It won't just be localized to one given vendor.
Well, I have a saying, because I have 2 teenagers. We all do what we're incentivized to do. Okay. So let's say you're one of the big four and you hit it big on an IBM audit. They don't have their stuff together. When you leave that, the first thing you're going to do is find all of your clients that software that have software in that enterprise, and you're going to call them all up and say, I think we have a live one here. I think we can hit them for another 100 grand, 200 grand, 300 grand, $1 million. And until you get the ship back in order and prove that, hey, it's a waste of time auditing us, you're going to get audited a lot. You know, when it said 26% face more than 2 audits, I bet it's over 10% that get 3 audits in a year. You know what I mean? Like, I bet there's that 10% that get audited a lot. So now I'm going to turn the question back on you, Rory. If you're getting audited a lot, what would you do to solve the issue?
I'd employ a consultant to help me out.
Exactly. I would figure out, let's stop the bleeding and show that we have our stuff together, right?
Yeah, totally. Now, if you haven't got the resource in-house, that's fine. You go and find the resource, either in a consultative capacity. But to that point too, as well, Jeffrey, it is within your right, as part of the audit of audit terms and conditions, if you are experiencing those revolving door audits, the same auditor is back again and again and again, it's within your right to say no. Go back to that that software publisher that's insisting on the second or the third or the fourth audit and say, pick another auditor. Because you don't have to accept the third-party audit company that is put before you. And particularly if they seem to be circling like sharks, like in such a sort of avaricious fashion. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is one of the nice things that Kylie recently did with the process kit as well, just to sort of do a little bit of flag waving, was to come up with a vendor, we call it a vendor audit value stream, because it touches on so many processes. You couldn't reasonably just call it a process. It's more like an epic. So that ships as part of the kit. If you want to get together a plan of attack, it's there. It's part of the kit. Have at it. Yep. But one thing we absolutely recommend within having that vendor out audit value stream is that you have some sort of vendor audit playbook, so you know what you can and can't do with the software, where and when and how you're doing it, so that when it comes down to sitting down at the table and somebody tries to hoodwink you with a term and condition, you can say, no, actually, Mr. Customer, what that means, or Mr. Auditor, what that means is our interpretation of it here, and we're comfortable with that, and we're happy to go to court over it.
Yep. And one thing I've really enjoyed about having Pam Fulmer, the attorney on this podcast, is how reticent the software publishers are for seeing their name in court documents of suing one of their customers. Because if you're Oracle, all right, Oracle is probably not a good one, but if you're Tibco, you're not going to want to be seen as this aggressor. That's not a way for your salespeople to make more sales.
It is definitely the nuclear option, isn't it? And the hat tip to Pam, and she's got some great war stories. She's definitely worth plugging into the next time she's on the podcast. But that Diageo case that we had in the UK that sort of made its way over to the US,
yes,
with SAP, that's worth looking up to anybody listening as well, and how a prospective sort of legal letter earned SAP sort of circa $270 million.
oh yeah,
There you
and
go.
that's
There's a teaser for you.
oh yeah, and that 17 million is a drop in the bucket for SAP. You know what I mean? Like, that's small change.
Sorry, 270 million.
Still, that's, I know companies that spend more than that on them annually. All I meant is, if that meant that I went from them SAP for 200 something million, and I was able to get out from under because I know they're predators. I'm not saying they are. I'm not saying they're not. That's not my job. But there are a lot of companies that spend a lot of money with them, and where they just say, it's not worth it. We value our relationships more than that. And so,
but equally too, you think about it from SAP's point of view, they will have lawyers on retainer year round. That letter won't have cost them anything.
Right.
That letter has gone to a vendor. They actually asked for double, which is why the kind of figure around the 270 mark was about halfway. They settled halfway, the client in question. And a lawyer's letter, that's what it costs. Thanks very much. That's a nice bit of paper right there.
But I would suggest that 270, that company is going to be trying to get out from under using that product. And that may be 2 years worth of sales.
Well, I mean, the switching costs involved in moving from a system like SAP
is expensive.
Is gargantuan, and it gets worse the larger you are as an organization. So, and it's not as if there's a litany of players in that space anyway. So,
right. All I was getting at is they may lose that much in sales, so they're going to be hesitant to hit that nuclear button.
Yeah. Oh, well, SAP, absolutely. There's the potential for bad publicity. As they say, there's no such thing as bad publicity. Oh yes, there is.
Oh yes, especially because a lot of those, when I say that they go away, they may not buy this add-on BI tool. They may go third-party BI tool, which is expensive. They may not go to some of these bolt-ons that SAP acquires a software publisher, and you have the choice to use their branded integration or use some third party. That's why I always think that these software vendors, these publishers, it's probably not wise to be seen as an aggressive type of entity.
Well, it can go right down to the other scale as well. So I knew a particular university here in the UK who were having joyous times with one of the major software vendors, and purely based around a dispute of about £80,000. So we've got to be getting about $100,000. And it wasn't the money so much, but it was the way it was actually being handled. It meant that there was an internal university policy to say all of that vendor's software is getting out of the university IT estate. We are ripping it out. We are not giving them grounds to come back and abuse us so badly.
Yep. And then that shows up on the news, and they lose 5 times that, 20 times that, by people saying, I'm an alumnus there. I'm not going to use that software either. You know what I mean?
That and also word will get round the university hierarchy too. And it's one of the worst places, I would argue, to have a bad reputation. Right. Because it then means that the lecturers won't teach on their software.
Right. That's a good point. And if I have ever known, I'm trying to figure out how to choose words lightly, people who love their stance and are immovable objects, it's usually university lecturers, right? They're not like the most, oh, you're right, that is a good point kind of people. You know what I mean? They're like, this is the way it's always been. And so I say that tongue in cheek because I taught a class this last summer. And so I am them. And so, I mean, this is just one of those things that these software publishers do what they do it well. You as a large company, small company, university, whatever, you don't do this well, and you need to have professional help. I think if I was going to sum up this whole Deloitte Global ITAM study would be the point that most organizations realize they need help to solve this organizational problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So know where you are. That's first and foremost. Know where you are. Know where you want to go. Again, I've been in too many organizations where they say, oh, we want best in class, we want world class. And, you know, I can roll out a very nice, tidy racist chart come spreadsheet of what best in class actually looks like. And that's when the horns come back slightly. It's like, no, let's just settle for good enough.
Yes.
And that's fine too. But just be realistic in your expectations. Understand that, you know, little steps a long way will eventually get you there, but take those steps.
Oh yes, and I'm a big believer in taking the incremental approach, because it's always going to get you further. It's kind of like the compound. I use the analogy of compound interest, right? You know, you take these old people that put their money in 3, 4, 5% interest, and then, you know, over 40, 50 years, they're like, look at all this did. I didn't touch it. And that's how this incremental, I feel like us making 5% improvement a year doesn't feel like much, but it's over 3, 4 years, we've really come a long way.
It is year on year, isn't it? Then at that point, yeah. So it does add up quite nicely, yeah.
So that's how I see that incremental, because most people do not have the people or the funds to do a big bang. You know, like, hey, we're going to tackle this. So they have to make these incremental steps, this incremental progress, until they do get the resources to do it right.
Yeah. And equally too, that big bang approach assumes that you've got a massive training budget to school people in new ways of working.
No, it doesn't happen.
Rarely happens with a salmon and ITAM program. It's always like, well, don't we just expect people to know this stuff?
Right. Yep. And also, to pile on, having IT people read software contracts probably isn't a good thing either. I mean, they're hired for their technology acumen, not their legal jargon acumen. And so anyway, Rory, it's been great having you with us. Any parting words or anything you would like to tell us about that you're working on?
So just to let you know, and I did do a blog about it recently, that process kit that we recently dropped hints about, we got it. We said that it was aligned to -1, and lots of organizations will say that, yes, we do best in class SAM, we do best in class ITAM. But somebody on LinkedIn said, is it aligned to -8? I was like, I'm on the committee. I'm not sure what -8 actually is. And what it is it's essentially a matrix by which you benchmark a body of work against -1. So I went through that and I put our body of work against -1. And I can honestly say now that we are now upon the ITAM standards website as one of only 2 organizations in the world that has got a body of work against the latest provision of the ISO 19770-1 standard. So I'm feeling rightly proud about now of our efforts, mine efforts, and Kylie Fowler's. I have to doff my cap in the direction of Kylie, because she kept me to task on all of that work. So it's out there, it's available. You can go to the SAM Charter website and get hold of a copy. I would absolutely recommend that you do, if you took part in this survey, strangely enough, because I think you need the help.
All right. And I probably need a different kind of help, but that's a different story. I don't want to start a LinkedIn poll on what kind I do need, but that
it's not that kind of podcast, Jeff. I'm not that qualified.
I might get different types of answers. Rory, it's great having you on once again. I hope you'll consider coming on in the near future. Thank you for lending your guidance and your expertise to us.
Thanks, Jeffrey. It's always a pleasure to come, and I'm happy to come on anytime. Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too, sir. Take care.